My husband slapped my best friend for looking at me while breastfeeding. When I left, his family paid off his ex to keep quiet about the abuse. Now he's in prison, and his mother is begging me to drop the charges. My husband slapped my best friend so hard her head snapped sideways, and that's when I knew I'd married a monster. We were at our baby's celebration dinner. Nothing fancy, just close family and Amy at our favorite Italian place downtown. I was 4 months postpartum, exhausted, leaking through nursing pads every 2 hours. My daughter had just fallen asleep in her carrier after fussing through appetizers, and I was finally able to relax enough to eat. I was adjusting my nursing top when Amy glanced over. Without thinking, I joked, "Want a taste?" We both laughed. It's the kind of stupid joke we'd been making since high school, the comfortable humor of people who've known each other half their lives. James stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. Before I could process what was happening, he backhanded Amy across the face. The sound echoed through the entire restaurant. "Her body is mine to look at," he said, his voice low and controlled. "Only mine." The room went completely silent. 20 people scattered across tables, all frozen, all staring. Amy held her cheek, tears already forming in her eyes. She grabbed her purse and left without saying a word. I heard the door chime as she pushed through it. I sat there with my fork halfway to my mouth, unable to move. James' mother, Estelle, actually defended him. She reached across the table and patted his hand. "He's protecting what's his," she said calmly, like he'd just held a door open instead of assaulting someone. That's what real men do. I found Amy in the bathroom 10 minutes later. A perfect handprint was already forming on her face, dark red against her pale skin. She was crying into paper towels, mascara running down both cheeks. "What if he hits you next?" she asked when she saw me. "He would never," I said automatically. But the words stuck in my throat like I was choking on them. I'd been noticing things since my pregnancy started. Little things at first. James getting angry when men looked at me in public. Him insisting I'd change if my shirt showed any cleavage. The way he started calling me his constantly. My wife. My woman. My property, basically, though he never used that exact word. After the baby came, it got worse. He hated when I breastfed in public, even fully covered. He'd make comments about other men seeing what belonged to him. Once at Target, a guy asked if I needed help reaching something on a high shelf, and James grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks. Later that night he apologized and said he just loved me so much the thought of losing me made him crazy. I should have left then. I know that now. The handprint on Amy's face became a bruise covering half her cheek. Purple at first, then green and yellow as it healed. It took 2 weeks to fade completely. She told people she fell rather than ruin my marriage. She actually said that. "I don't want to cause problems for you." I stayed. 4-month-old baby, no job because James insisted I quit when I got pregnant, no money because his name was on everything. The house, the cars, even the bank accounts were joint, but he monitored every transaction. I'd see him scrolling through the statements on his phone, highlighting charges, asking me to explain a $7 coffee. I slept in the nursery after the dinner incident. I told James the first wanted to be close to the baby in case she woke up, but really I just couldn't stand being in the same bed with him. He acted like nothing happened. When I brought up Amy, he said it was just a little slap, that I was overreacting, that she'd been disrespectful and needed to learn boundaries. 3 nights later, he came home drunk. I was nursing the baby in the living room, our living room in our house, when he walked through the door around 11. He saw me and exploded. "Cover yourself," he shouted. "What if someone sees?" "I'm feeding our daughter," I said. "In our living room. Who's going to see?" He crossed the room in 3 steps and grabbed my arm, the same one I was supporting the baby with. His fingers dug in hard enough to bruise immediately. The baby started crying, startled by the sudden movement. "Look what you did," he snarled. Like I'd grabbed my own arm. "You made her cry." I sat there frozen while the baby wailed against my chest. James stood over me breathing hard, smelling like whiskey and rage. Then he stumbled to the bedroom and passed out on top of the covers fully clothed. I waited until I heard him snoring. Then I called Amy. She came immediately. It was almost midnight, but she showed up in 20 minutes, helped me pack whatever we could grab quickly. Baby clothes and diapers and documents I'd hidden in the diaper bag weeks ago, my birth certificate and social security card, and the baby's hospital records. I left my wedding ring on the kitchen counter with a note that said, "I'm not your property." The next morning, my phone started blowing up. James called 47 times in 2 hours. The voicemails cycled through screaming, crying, threatening, apologizing. He'd realized what he'd done. He couldn't live without me. If I didn't come back, he'd find me. He loved me more than life itself. He'd kill himself if I left him. I was tearing our family apart over nothing. His mother called me terrible for abandoning him over one mistake. "2 mistakes," I said. He hit Amy. Then he grabbed me. "Boys will be boys," Estelle said, like we were talking about him tracking mud through the house instead of violence. "You're being dramatic." I hung up on her. Amy helped me file a restraining order that afternoon. We went to the police station and I showed them the bruises on my arm, the photos I'd taken of Amy's face. They photographed everything and gave me paperwork to fill out. James was served at work the next day, which meant everyone in his office knew. Then he started fighting for custody. His lawyer claimed I was unstable, that I'd abandoned the marital home without cause, that I'd taken his daughter away from him over minor disagreements. My lawyer told me to document everything, every violation of the restraining order, every threatening text, every drive-by of Amy's apartment where we were staying. His friends started harassing me online. Comments on my Facebook posts calling me dramatic, saying I'd ruined a good man over nothing. Women I'd thought were friends took his side. One of them messaged me saying I should have been grateful to have a husband who cared so much. I blocked all of them. James texted me from a friend's phone 3 days after the restraining order. "You're mine forever. You can't escape me." I screenshot it immediately and sent it to my lawyer. Then I replied from Amy's phone since mine was turned off. "I'm nobody's property." But that morning changed everything. Amy was making breakfast when her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered, and I watched her face go pale. "How did you get this number?" she said. Then she hung up, hands shaking. "Who was that?" I asked. "James' ex," Amy said. "Rebecca. The one before you." I'd never heard of Rebecca. In 3 years of dating and 2 years of marriage, James had never mentioned anyone named Rebecca. "She said she needs to warn you," Amy continued. "She's driving here now." Rebecca arrived an hour later. She was thin, nervous, constantly checking over her shoulder as she walked from her car to Amy's door. She looked like someone who'd spent years expecting to be followed. We sat in Amy's living room while my daughter played with blocks on the floor. Rebecca pulled out her phone and started showing us photos. Bruises covering her ribs, black eyes, a split lip, police reports, hospital records showing a fractured eye socket and 2 broken ribs. "This was me," she said quietly. 3 years with James. My stomach dropped. "He broke my ribs," Rebecca continued, scrolling through more photos. "Fracture my eye socket. Always places covered by clothes, except when he lost control." "Why didn't anyone know about this?" I asked. "His parents paid me to disappear. $50,000 to sign an NDA, leave the state, never contact him again." She showed me the agreement on her phone. James' father's signature at the bottom, next to Rebecca's and a lawyer's. "They've done this before," Rebecca said. "They'll do it again." But the restraining order. I had one too. She pulled up a news article on her phone. "Read this." The headline said, "Local woman missing after violating NDA agreement." The article was about a woman named Melissa who disappeared 2 days after breaking her non-disclosure agreement to warn James' girlfriend after Rebecca. "You think James—" I couldn't finish the sentence. "I think his family has money and connections," Rebecca said. "And I'm risking everything telling you this." Amy grabbed my hand. "We need to leave. Not just his place. The city." Rebecca nodded. "Tonight. Don't tell anyone where you're going." My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize, but the area code matched James' lawyer's office. My client is offering $100,000 for full custody and your signature on a non-disclosure agreement. You have 24 hours to accept. Rebecca's face went white when I showed her. That's how it starts. They offer you money to disappear. Before anyone could respond, the door to Amy's apartment exploded open. James stood there breathing hard. He looked at me, then at Amy, then at Rebecca. The restraining order says 500 feet, Amy started. Expired an hour ago, James said calmly. Judge overturned it. My lawyer's good. He looked directly at Rebecca. You broke your NDA. Rebecca ran for the back door. James didn't follow her. He just kept staring at me. Pack the baby's things, he said. We're going home. No, I said. He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. Yes. Or Rebecca has an accident. Your choice. My phone buzzed again. A photo loaded on the screen. Rebecca's car, taken from another vehicle directly behind her. Someone was following her right now. 5 minutes, James said. Choose. I moved toward the baby carrier where my daughter slept. My hands shook as I unbuckled the straps. I needed time to think, to find some way out that didn't end with Rebecca hurt or worse. Amy stood frozen near the kitchen, her eyes wide. She looked at the back door, then at James, then at me. But James blocked the only exit, his body filling the doorway like a wall. I held my daughter closer and opened my mouth to speak, to stall. But before I could say anything, James pulled his phone from his pocket and turned the screen toward me. A video was playing, live footage from inside a car. I could see Rebecca's vehicle through the windshield, her brake lights glowing red at a stoplight. The person filming was right behind her, close enough that I could read her license plate. This wasn't a bluff. Someone was actually following her right now, waiting for James' signal. I looked at that video and knew I had no choice. I'll come home with you right now if you call off whoever's following Rebecca, I said. James smiled wider and made a quick call. 2 words into the phone, stand down. He showed me the video again. The car behind Rebecca turned off at the next intersection and disappeared. Relief and terror flooded through me simultaneously. I'd just agreed to go back into that house, back under his control. Amy finally found her voice. You can't go with him. We should call the police. There has to be another way. But I was already moving, gathering the diaper bag from the couch. I looked right at Amy and very quietly mouthed 3 words. Call the police. Her eyes widened with understanding. She stepped back. I slung the diaper bag over my shoulder and walked toward James with my crying baby in my arms. He put his hand on my lower back, possessive and controlling, and guided me out the door. I didn't look back at Amy because I knew I'd break down completely if I did. James' car was in the parking lot. He opened the passenger door and waited. I buckled the baby into her car seat and climbed into the front. The door closed with a heavy thunk that sounded like prison. We pulled out in complete silence. I kept my phone low where James couldn't see and found Rebecca's number from earlier. I typed fast. He knows about the NDA. Someone was following you. Get somewhere safe. Hide. I'm sorry. I hit send and watched the message go through. James glanced over and saw the phone in my hands. He snatched it away so fast I didn't have time to react. He didn't even look at what I'd sent. He just rolled down his window and threw my phone out onto the highway. I twisted in my seat and watched it hit the pavement and shatter. Cars ran over the pieces until they were dust. That phone was my last connection to help. Now it was gone. James rolled the window back up and kept driving like nothing had happened. The house looked exactly the same when we pulled into the driveway. Same white siding, same black shutters, same lawn James paid someone to maintain weekly. But Estelle was standing on the front porch wearing a dress and pearls like she was expecting company. She smiled when she saw us, but her eyes were cold. James parked and opened my door. I got the baby out of her car seat and held her close as we walked up to the house. I'm so glad you came to your senses, Estelle said. She touched my arm and guided me inside. Families need to stick together through hard times. The house smelled like pine sol. Everything was exactly where it had been when I left. But what made my stomach turn was the nursery. Estelle had set it up exactly as before. The crib in the same spot, fresh sheets on the mattress, the mobile hanging with its little animals. She stood there looking proud, expecting me to thank her. I put my daughter in the crib and watched her sleep. This room that looked so normal was actually a cage. James appeared in the doorway. He started laying out rules while Estelle nodded along. No phone. No computer. No leaving the house without him. He'd be working from home now to keep an eye on me. I agreed to everything. Yes, I understood. Yes, I'd follow the rules. Yes, I knew it was for the best. But inside my head, I was cataloging details. The spare key under the planter by the back door. The neighbor's schedule. The walking path behind the house that led to the main road. The window in the laundry room that didn't lock properly. I filed away every piece of information that might help me escape later. That first night back, I slept in the nursery with my baby. After James went to bed, I pushed the changing table in front of the door. It wasn't heavy enough to actually stop him, but it would make noise and give me warning. I lay on the daybed against the wall and stared at the ceiling for hours. Every sound made me jump. I barely slept at all. The next morning, I heard voices at the front door. James and another voice I didn't recognize at first. Then I heard Amy demanding to see me. I crept to the top of the stairs with the baby in my arms. Through the railing, I could see Amy on the front porch. A man in a suit stood next to her. Detective Garza, I heard him say. I need to speak with your wife directly. James couldn't refuse without looking suspicious, so he let them in. I walked down the steps with my daughter against my shoulder. Detective Garza introduced himself and asked if I was being held here against my will. The words James had coached me that morning came back automatically.
Ai fine.
I chose to come home. I was upset and made some bad decisions, but I'm thinking clearly now. I stared at Detective Garza while I said it, trying to communicate the truth with my eyes. Please see through this. Please know I'm lying. Please help me. But I didn't know if he could read what I wasn't saying out loud. He handed me his card and told me to call if I needed anything. Then, he and Amy left. I watched through the window as they walked back to his car. Amy looked back at the house once before getting in. After they left, James was furious. He paced the living room with his hands flexing. He pulled out his phone and called his lawyer, Ashton Willis. He described Amy as unstable and obsessed. He said she was harassing us, refusing to accept that I'd come back voluntarily. He talked about filing harassment charges against her, about getting a restraining order. The lies flowed so smoothly, I realized this wasn't the first time he'd done this. The next morning, James left for a lawyer meeting. Estelle showed up 10 minutes later, like she'd been waiting around the corner. She checked all the windows and doors while I fed the baby in the nursery. Then she settled into the armchair across from me and started talking about how marriage requires sacrifice and loyalty. She talked about supporting your husband through hard times. How modern women don't understand commitment anymore. Then she mentioned casually that she'd had to learn these lessons herself when James' father was alive. Sometimes men get frustrated, she said. Wives need to be understanding. She touched her wrist absently while she said it. I saw a thin white scar there, faded but visible. That's when I understood. James didn't invent this behavior. He learned it watching his father. And Estelle stayed and defended it. Now she was trying to teach me to do the same. After Estelle finally left, I went to the nursery closet for extra blankets. My hand hit something hard in the back corner. I pulled out an old tablet covered in dust, shoved back there and forgotten. My hands shook as I turned it on. The battery was dead, but I found the charger and plugged it in. 20 minutes later, it powered up. It still had internet access through the house Wi-Fi. I opened the email app with my heart pounding. I composed a message to Amy using careful words that wouldn't trigger suspicion if James somehow saw it. I wrote about needing to discuss our daughter's medical records and mentioned specific details about the house layout and James' schedule that Amy would recognize as a call for help. I hit send and watched the message go through. Then I deleted the browser history, cleared the email cache, and powered the tablet down. I found a large stuffed elephant on the shelf and carefully opened the back seam. I slid the tablet inside and sewed it back up with thread from my sewing kit. The elephant went back on the shelf, looking innocent. 2 days crawled by in the same suffocating pattern. James worked from the dining room table, where he could see everything. Every time I moved, he looked up and tracked me with his eyes. Estelle came by every afternoon with meals. She'd make comments about how much healthier I looked, how the house felt warm and lived in now. On the third day, someone knocked on the door. A woman from Child Services doing a wellness check. James stayed right next to me the entire visit. The social worker asked questions about feeding schedules. James answered most of them, even though she directed the questions at me. As she turned to leave, she stumbled slightly and grabbed my arm to steady herself. I felt paper press into my palm. I closed my fingers around it fast. After she left, I went to the bathroom and unfolded the tiny note. "Help is being arranged," it said in small print. I flushed it down the toilet. That afternoon, while the baby napped, I was straightening the nursery when I noticed a small black device tucked behind the baby monitor. About the size of a quarter with a tiny red light. A recording device. I checked the bookshelf. Found another one between books. A third under the changing table. James had been recording every word I said in this room. I put all the devices back exactly where I found them. From now on, I only talked about baby care when I was in the nursery. The house phone rang while James was in the shower that evening. I answered fast before it could wake the baby. Rebecca's voice came through in a whisper. I went into hiding, but I sent evidence to Detective Garza before I disappeared. James' family has a lawyer named Ashton Willis who specializes in making problems go away. Listen, The line went dead. I stood there staring at the phone. Ashton Willis. I needed to remember that name. That night, James came home with flowers. Pink roses in a clear vase. He said he was sorry for being so strict lately. "I just love you so much," he said, pulling me close. "The thought of losing you makes me crazy." I recognized this from what Rebecca had described. The cycle. Explosion, then remorse, then the honeymoon phase. Then tension builds until the next explosion. I leaned into his embrace and told him I understood. The lies came easier than they should have. Over the next few days, I started complying with every single rule. I asked permission before doing anything. I wore the clothes he picked out. I made his favorite meals. Estelle noticed. She told me approvingly that I seemed to have adjusted my attitude. Inside, I was watching everything. What time James left. When he came home. Which doors he locked. Which windows had alarms. I was gathering information while they thought I was breaking. The baby had a checkup scheduled. James drove us there and came inside to the waiting room. When they called our name, he stood up to come back with us. The nurse told him only one parent could come due to space. He hesitated but sat back down. While she was weighing the baby, I pulled out a tiny note I'd written that morning. I pressed it into the nurse's hand when she reached for the chart. Her eyes went wide, but she nodded slightly and slipped it into her pocket. The note said I was being held against my will and gave Amy's contact information. 3 days later, Ashton Willis came to the house. James told me to go upstairs while they talked business. I took the baby to the nursery and closed the door. Then I crept back out and sat at the top of the stairs where I could hear them. Ashton was explaining custody strategy. How judges were often sympathetic to fathers' rights, especially when mothers appeared unstable. He mentioned getting statements from Estelle about my erratic behavior. He talked about my history of abandoning the home. James added that I'd been showing signs of postpartum depression. They discussed medical evaluations and psychiatric assessments. I listened to them plan how to take my daughter away and paint me as crazy. I went back to the nursery and held my baby while she slept. The next afternoon, Estelle arrived with 3 photo albums. She sat them on the coffee table and told me to sit with her. Page after page showed James as a little boy. Birthday parties. School pictures. Family vacations. Estelle pointed to each photo and told stories about what a gentle child he was. Then she opened the second album. James as a teenager, still smiling in every photo. She turned a page, and there was a family photo from some holiday. James stood next to his father. I stared at the man in the picture. He had the same build as James, the same jaw, but it was his eyes that made my breath catch. Cold and flat, even while he smiled. The exact same eyes James had when he looked at me now. Understanding hit me like cold water. James learned this. Someone taught him how to be this way. 2 days later, James told me to dust his office. He sat at the dining room table, where he could watch while I worked. I started with the bookshelves, then the desk. I opened the top drawer to dust inside. Legal documents filled the drawer. I pulled one out carefully. The family owned a house in another state, another deed for a cabin in the mountains, a third property in a different state entirely. My hands shook as I photographed each page with a hidden tablet I'd tucked into my cleaning caddy. Then I found a folder marked settlements. Page after page of legal agreements, payments to unnamed parties, confidentiality clauses. 50,000 here, 75,000 there, 100,000. All signed by James' father years ago. Some signed by James more recently. I photographed every page, my heart pounding so hard I thought James would hear it from the dining room. I put everything back exactly where I found it. The next morning, someone knocked hard on the front door. Detective Garza stood on the porch with 2 uniformed officers. He held up a warrant. James read it with his jaw tight. Then he stepped back and let them in. They searched the property and vehicles. I watched from the nursery window as officers pulled evidence bags from James' car. Detective Garza came upstairs and knocked on the nursery door. He looked at me for a long moment. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Yes," I said, because James was standing right behind him. "Are you here voluntarily?" "Yes." Detective Garza's eyes told me he knew I was lying, but he couldn't do anything about it. They left with their evidence bags 20 minutes later. James came into the nursery as soon as the police cars disappeared. He closed the door behind him, locked it, walked toward me until I backed up against the changing table. He got close enough that I could smell alcohol on his breath, even though it wasn't even noon. "What did you tell the police?" he asked quietly. "Nothing," I said. "I haven't spoken to them since the first visit." My voice shook. Tears started running down my face. He stared at me for another long moment. Then he stepped back and left. I sat on the floor and held the baby while my whole body shook. An hour later, Estelle's car pulled into the driveway. I heard her voice in the kitchen, sharp and worried. I'd left the baby monitor on deliberately, placed where they wouldn't see it. Estelle said the family's lawyer was concerned, very concerned. Detective Garza was digging into everything. He'd contacted 3 other women besides Rebecca. James asked if any of them were talking. Estelle said she didn't know yet. James said they'd handled this before. They'd handle it again. Estelle reminded him that his father wasn't here anymore to make problems disappear. Then, Estelle said something I had to replay in my head to believe. There were 3 other women besides Rebecca.
For victims before me.
That afternoon, James told me I could call Amy. He sat right next to me on the couch while I dialed. Put the phone on speaker. Amy answered on the first ring. I told her I was fine, that I'd come home to work things out. Before we hung up, Amy said she'd been getting strange messages from numbers she didn't recognize, telling her to mind her own business. James asked if she'd reported them to police.
She said yes.
He said good, that she should definitely keep reporting any harassment. We said goodbye. James took the phone from my hand and turned it off. The next day, a woman I didn't know came to the house. She rang the doorbell around 2 in the afternoon. James invited her in. Estelle came down from upstairs and her face went tight when she saw the woman. They went into James' office. I crept closer to the door. Estelle asked about payments. The woman said police had contacted her last week. Asked about an agreement she'd signed years ago. James said they'd take care of it. The woman's voice got harder. She said she'd kept quiet for 5 years. But if Detective Garza was digging up everything anyway, she wasn't going to prison for them. Estelle offered more money. The woman laughed. Said money didn't matter if she ended up like the others. Then she left. Another victim. Another woman who'd taken money to stay quiet. That night, James touched my shoulder while I was washing dishes. My whole body went rigid. I couldn't breathe. The panic attack hit so fast, I didn't have time to hide it. James grabbed my arm. "What's wrong with you?" I couldn't answer. Couldn't get air. He let go, and I collapsed against the counter. Estelle came into the kitchen. She looked at me gasping for breath, then at James. "She clearly isn't handling the stress well," Estelle said. "She needs help. Maybe medication for anxiety." James agreed. Said we should make an appointment with a doctor. Get me evaluated. I finally got my breathing under control. Told them I was fine. Estelle patted my hand. "Lots of new mother struggle. There's no shame in needing medication." I saw exactly what they were doing. Building a story. Making me look unstable. Creating evidence they could use in court. The next afternoon, James and Estelle went outside to look at something in the garden. I ran to the nursery and pulled the tablet from the stuffed bear. The 3 other women besides Rebecca. The properties in 3 states. The woman who'd visited yesterday. Detective Garza digging into all of them. Estelle's panic about exposure. The recording devices throughout the house. I attached the photos of the legal documents. Included every name I'd heard mentioned. Then I cleared everything and stuffed the tablet back into the bear. Went back downstairs just as James and Estelle came in through the back door. 2 days later, a woman in a gray suit came to the house.
"Court-appointed mediator," she said.
"Here to assess the custody situation." James welcomed her like an honored guest. Showed her around. Pointed out the nursery. The baby's toys. Family photos on the walls. He talked about how much he loved being a father.
How worried he was about me.
The mediator asked what concerned him. James sighed. Said I'd been acting erratic since the baby was born. That I'd left suddenly with no warning. That I'd made accusations he'd never hurt me. That I seemed paranoid and anxious all the time. Then the mediator asked to speak with me alone. I tried to seem normal.
Calm.
But I was so exhausted from constant fear, from pretending everything was fine. My answers came out flat. Disconnected. I saw her writing notes.
Saw the way she looked at me.
When she left, I knew exactly what her report would say. 2 days later, the house phone rang while I was feeding the baby. James answered downstairs. He called up to me. "Detective Garza needs to speak with you." My hands shook as I took the phone. The detective told me Amy had been attacked outside her apartment last night. 2 men beat her badly enough that she ended up in the emergency room with a broken arm and bruises covering her face and ribs. The men told her to stop interfering in other people's marriages. I looked at James standing in the doorway. His face showed perfect concern. "How terrible," he said. "The city's become so dangerous." Detective Garza said Amy was stable and recovering. After I hung up, James put his hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry about your friend." The touch made my skin crawl. That afternoon, I went to use the bathroom. Something caught my eye near the ceiling. A tiny black in the smoke detector. I stood on the toilet to look closer. A small camera lens. I checked the bedroom next. Found another one in the bookshelf pointing at the bed. James had been recording everything. Every time I nursed my daughter. Every time I changed clothes. Every private moment. I barely made it back to the toilet before I threw up. 3 days later, a process server came to the door. James signed for the papers, and his face went dark red as he read them. Amy had managed to get an emergency hearing scheduled. James had to appear in court in 3 days. He slammed the papers down on the table. Estelle picked them up and read through them. James turned to me. "How did your lawyer get such detailed information about the house?" I kept my face completely blank. "I don't know. I haven't been able to contact anyone." Terror ran through me that he would find the tablet. He stared at me for a long minute. Finally, he looked away. That night, Estelle moved into the guest room. She said she'd be staying until after the court hearing. Round-the-clock supervision. As the court date got closer, James started drinking heavily every night. Sitting in the living room with a bottle, raging about ungrateful wives and interfering lawyers. Twice he came upstairs and pounded on the nursery door. I sat on the floor with my back against it and my daughter in my arms, praying the lock would hold. Both times Estelle talked him down. The night before the hearing, James came into the nursery after I'd put the baby down. He pulled a chair close and told me exactly what I was going to say to the judge. That I had postpartum depression. That I left because I wasn't thinking clearly. That I came back because I realized my family needed me. That I wanted to work on our marriage. He made me repeat the words back to him over and over. Each time I stumbled, he made me start again. We sat there for over an hour. Then he stood up and walked to the door. I heard the lock click from the outside. He'd installed a new one that locked from the hallway. I was trapped in the nursery with my sleeping baby and no way out. At the courthouse the next morning, I was surrounded by James and his family. Estelle held my elbow. James' hand stayed on my lower back. Ashton Willis met us in the hallway and pulled me aside. He went over my testimony one more time. Then the courtroom doors opened. The judge was a woman with gray hair pulled back tight. She looked at all of us over her reading glasses as we took our seats. Amy sat at the other table. When she saw me, her eyes widened. I knew I must look terrible. The judge asked me to approach the witness stand. She asked me directly if I was being held against my will. I looked at James sitting there with his perfect concerned expression. I looked at Ashton Willis with his expensive suit. I looked at Estelle watching me with cold warning in her eyes. Then I looked at Amy and saw her slight nod. I opened my mouth, and the words that came out weren't the ones James had made me rehearse. I'm being held prisoner in my own home, I said. There are cameras in the bathroom and bedroom recording me. My friend was attacked by men James sent. There are other women before me who signed agreements to stay quiet. James' mother is helping keep me trapped. I fear for my life and my daughter's safety. I watched James' perfect mask crack. His face went from concerned to shocked to furious. He started to stand, but Ashton Willis grabbed his arm. The judge held up her hand for silence. She asked me more questions. I answered everyone truthfully. I told her about Rebecca and the NDA, about the legal documents, about the recordings Detective Garza had seized, about everything I'd been too scared to say before. When I finished, the judge ordered an immediate investigation and granted me temporary custody right there. She issued a new restraining order and called for court security. James exploded out of his chair. He tried to reach me, screaming that I was his wife and I belonged to him. It took 3 security officers to restrain him. Amy grabbed my arm and rushed me toward a side door. Detective Garza was waiting at a side entrance with a patrol car running. Amy handed me and the baby into the back seat. As we pulled away, I could still hear James' voice echoing from inside the courthouse. Detective Garza drove to a domestic violence shelter on the other side of town. The building looked like a regular house but had security cameras and reinforced doors. A woman met us at the entrance. Madison, the shelter director. She had kind eyes. She led us inside to a small private room and explained the shelter rules. No one could know we were here. Security protocols. Resources available. As she talked, the fear and tension I'd been holding for weeks finally broke through. I started crying and couldn't stop. Madison put her arm around my shoulders while I sobbed. For the first time in weeks, we were behind locked doors that James didn't control. We were actually safe. Later that evening, Madison brought me a new phone with a restricted number. I called Amy and she answered on the first ring. When she heard my voice, she started crying. She told me about the attack, about her broken arm and bruised ribs. But she also told me she'd already talked to Detective Garza and given a full statement. She promised to testify no matter what it cost her. I told her how brave she was. That's what real friends do, she said. The next morning, Detective Garza came to the shelter with a thick folder. He asked me to start from the beginning and tell him everything. I talked for 3 hours straight. About the recording devices, the documents in James' office, the tablet I'd used to photograph everything. When I finished, he told me they were building cases.
Kidnapping.
Unlawful imprisonment. Assault.
Stalking.
He said Rebecca agreed to testify despite her NDA. That made me cry because she was risking everything to help me. The second day of interviews, Detective Garza brought new information. For previous victims had all signed NDAs with James' family. Now they were all cooperating. Each of them had similar stories: controlling behavior, violence,
Threats.
then James' parents showing up with a lawyer and a check. Together, all our stories painted a clear picture. This wasn't one bad relationship. This was a pattern enabled by family money. 3 days after the court hearing, I was in the shelter common room when the security alarm went off. Madison rushed in and told everyone to move away from windows. Through the glass, I saw James' car in the parking lot. He was walking toward the building. Madison was already on the phone with police. James reached the front door and started pounding on it. The reinforced lock held. He yelled that I was his wife, that I belonged to him. Security cameras recorded everything. Police cars pulled up within 4 minutes. Officers got out with hands on their weapons. James was still yelling when they grabbed his arms. He fought them as they pushed him against his car. I watched through the window as they put handcuffs on his wrists. The next day, Amy called to tell me about the bail hearing. The prosecutor presented evidence: photos of my bruises, Amy's hospital records, statements from Rebecca and the other victims. The judge denied bail. She said James posed a clear threat, that given his family's money, he was a flight risk. Detective Garza called me after the hearing. He said James would be held for at least 30 days while the investigation continued. 30 days to build a new life without constant fear. Madison sat with me and helped me fill out forms for emergency assistance, food stamps, medical coverage, cash assistance. She showed me information about job training programs, medical billing, office administration, early childhood education. All provided childcare during classes. For the first time since my pregnancy, I saw an actual path forward. I chose the medical billing program. It started the following week. That afternoon, Amy came to file for divorce and sole custody. Given everything that happened, she was confident the court would rule in my favor. The criminal charges against James made a huge difference. The evidence of abuse, the multiple victims. The judge would see that James was dangerous. The process would take months. But every day that passed with documented separation made my case stronger. The following week, I had my first therapy appointment. The shelter connected me with a counselor who worked with domestic violence survivors. She asked me to tell her what brought me there. I started talking and couldn't stop. When I finished, she said what happened wasn't my fault, that my responses were normal survival strategies. She explained that trauma changes your brain. The therapy would be hard because I'd have to relive everything. But that's how I would process it instead of just carrying it. 2 weeks after James' arrest, Rebecca came to visit. Madison approved her as a safe visitor. We sat in the common room with my daughter playing on a blanket. Rebecca looked different, less scared. We cried together. She told me breaking her NDA might cost her the settlement money. James' parents were threatening to sue her. But she said seeing James arrested made it all worth it. I told her she saved my life. 3 weeks after my escape, Amy was released from the hospital. Her arm was in a cast, and her face still showed fading bruises. She came to the shelter as soon as she could walk without help. We sat together on the couch with my daughter between us. The baby patted Amy's cast gently. Amy told me she'd do it all again. She said that's what real friendship means. For weeks after the court hearing, I got a call from the prosecutor's office. They wanted me to testify at a grand jury hearing. The grand jury would decide if there was enough evidence to indict James on felony charges. I agreed immediately. Amy came to prepare me. She explained what kinds of questions the prosecutor would ask. We practiced for 2 hours. She made me tell the story over and over until I could get through it without crying. The grand jury hearing took place in a small room with wood paneling. 12 people sat in 2 rows facing me. The prosecutor asked me to state my name. Then she asked me to describe my relationship with James. I started with the celebration dinner when he hit Amy. I described every bruise, every threat, every violation. The prosecutor showed me photos the police took. I identified each mark. I told them about Rebecca. The prosecutor presented her medical records. Hospital reports showing broken ribs and a fractured eye socket. I described the day James broke into Amy's apartment, how he threatened Rebecca's life if I didn't come with him. I told them about being held at the house, the cameras, the recordings, how James monitored every conversation. The testimony lasted 3 hours. By the end, my voice was hoarse, but I got through it without breaking down. 2 days later, Amy called with the results. The grand jury indicted James on multiple felony charges:
Kidnapping.
assault, stalking, unlawful imprisonment. The prosecutor said this was one of the strongest cases she'd seen. I hung up and looked at my daughter napping in her crib. For the first time since leaving James, I felt like justice might actually happen. The next week brought new problems. A woman I didn't know called the shelter asking for me. She said she was calling on behalf of Estelle. She had an offer to discuss. Madison refused to put her through. Then letters started arriving. Envelopes with law firm return addresses. Inside were offers. Drop the charges, and Estelle would pay me $200,000. I refused immediately. I told Madison to document every attempt. Amy said this demonstrated continued intimidation, that it strengthened our case even more. Madison told me about an opening in the transitional apartment program, affordable housing for domestic violence survivors. I applied immediately. The program accepted me within days. Moving day came 2 weeks after the grand jury hearing. The apartment was small. 1 bedroom, a tiny kitchen, but it had a deadbolt and a security system. I furnished it with thrift store finds. None of it matched, but it was mine. Every piece I chose. James didn't know where it was. For the first time in months, I felt safe in my own space. I needed income. The shelter connected me with a job program. Remote data entry for a company that hired domestic violence survivors. The first paycheck arrived 2 weeks later. $280 for 20 hours of work. I stared at the number on my phone screen. It was mine. Money I earned. I bought groceries with it. Diapers and formula. The independence felt revolutionary. Amy called with an update about James' case. The trial date was set for 4 months away. In the meantime, the restraining order was extended. James remained in custody. Amy said James' lawyer was getting desperate, trying to negotiate a plea deal. Detective Garza asked to meet with me. He brought a file folder thick with documents. He told me they uncovered new evidence. Records from before James' father died. Settlements paid to women who accused James' father of assault. The pattern went back 30 years. Estelle was one of his victims first. She married him young. He broke her arm twice, gave her a concussion. But she never left. Instead, she learned to enable him, to help him hide his violence, to protect the family reputation at any cost. When James' father died, she transferred that loyalty to James. Detective Garza said this didn't excuse her actions, but it helped explain why she defended James so fiercely. Madison told me about a support group that met every Thursday evening. Domestic violence survivors who gathered to share stories. I was nervous the first time I went. The meeting room had folding chairs in a circle. 8 women were already there. They shared their stories. Some were years into recovery. Others were newer to freedom. One woman described her ex-husband's escalating control. Another talked about the first time he hit her. Their stories sounded like mine. Different details, but the same pattern. Hearing them talk helped me feel less alone. My daughter had her 6-month checkup. The pediatrician examined her thoroughly. She commented on how much healthier my daughter seemed, how she was meeting all her milestones. She said babies absorb stress from their environment, that children thrive in calm, stable homes. I looked at my daughter on the exam table. She was babbling and smiling, so different from the fussy, tense baby she was months ago. Knowing she was thriving made every hard choice worth it. Rebecca called one evening. She sounded excited. She got a job at a nonprofit. They help domestic violence survivors navigate legal systems. Rebecca said she'd be using her own experience to guide others. That turning her trauma into purpose felt healing. She encouraged me to consider advocacy work once I was ready. Amy called late one afternoon. The prosecutor made an offer to James. A plea deal. 15 years in prison in exchange for pleading guilty to all charges and waiving custody rights permanently. 15 years. James would be locked away until my daughter was a teenager. The custody rights meant he could never petition for visitation. But there was another option. Push for trial. Risk a jury. Maybe get a longer sentence. Or maybe he'd win and get less time. The certainty of 15 years versus the gamble of trial. I sat on my couch holding my phone. My daughter played on the floor with blocks. I watched her stack them and knock them down. Heard her laugh. 15 years of safety. 15 years of building a life without fear. I thought about the trial. About testifying in open court.
About James sitting there watching me.
About the risk of a jury believing his lies. I looked at my daughter again. She was everything. Keeping her safe was the only thing that mattered. I called Amy the next morning and told her I wanted to accept the deal. 3 weeks later, I sat in the courtroom gallery. Amy on my left, Rebecca on my right. 2 other women sat behind us. James stood at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit with his hands cuffed. The judge asked him to allocate to each charge. He had to admit out loud what he did. His voice was flat and emotionless as he said he kidnapped me, that he assaulted me and Amy, that he stalked Rebecca. He listed each crime like he was reading a grocery list. When the allocation finished, the judge asked if I wanted to make a statement before sentencing. I stood up and walked to the microphone. I looked at James for the first time since entering the courtroom. I told the judge that my daughter deserved to grow up without fear. That 15 years meant she'd be nearly grown before having to decide if she wanted contact with him. I sat back down. The judge accepted the plea and sentenced James to 15 years in state prison with no early parole. 2 officers moved forward to take James away. He turned to look at me one last time. But I was already standing up to leave. He was no longer the most important thing in my life. My daughter was waiting with the babysitter. I needed to get back to her. Amy finalized my divorce over the next few weeks. The custody arrangement was part of the plea deal. James' parental rights were terminated completely. The legal bills came to over $20,000. Amy told me about a domestic violence legal fund that covered most of it. I set up a payment plan for the remaining $3,000. Around the same time, I heard through Amy that Estelle was charged with conspiracy and intimidation of witnesses. Estelle took a plea deal. 2 years of probation, and a restraining order keeping her away from me and my daughter. Amy mentioned that Estelle was selling the family house to pay her legal fees. My daughter would never have to be around that toxic influence. 6 months after James' sentencing, I moved into my own apartment outside the transitional program. I'd been working full-time at an office job that provided benefits and childcare assistance. I saved enough for a security deposit and first month's rent. Amy helped me move. We ordered pizza and ate it sitting on the floor while my daughter crawled between us. Then my daughter pulled herself up using the wall and took 3 wobbly steps toward Amy before falling on her bottom. We both cheered. My daughter clapped her hands and laughed. It was the first time she walked. I was so glad Amy was there to see it. The apartment was mine. My name on the lease. My furniture inside. My daughter taking her first steps in our home. Nobody could take it away. A few months later, I enrolled in community college classes toward a degree in social work. I wanted to help other women escape situations like mine. The schedule was exhausting. Work during the day. Classes 2 evenings a week. Parenting the rest of the time. But I was building a future. Actually living with purpose and goals that were mine. Rebecca called one Saturday and asked if I wanted to volunteer at the shelter. She'd started going once a week to help new residents. I agreed. We went together the following weekend. Madison introduced us to 3 women who'd recently left abusive partners. We spent the afternoon explaining restraining orders and custody processes. One woman asked how long it took before the fear went away. I told her honestly that I still had bad days, but they were getting fewer. Sharing my story with women who were where I was a year ago hurt, but it also felt healing. Rebecca and I made plans to volunteer together every other Saturday. My daughter's first birthday arrived on a warm spring day. I threw her a small party at my apartment. Amy came early to help set up. Rebecca arrived with a cake she'd baked. Amy stopped by between court hearings. Detective Garza came with his wife. Madison brought flowers. 3 women from my support group came with their own children. I watched my daughter smash her face into the cake while everyone sang happy birthday. I looked around at all the people who had helped save us. The community that formed around my crisis was now celebrating this milestone with me. I started sleeping through the night without nightmares most of the time. I could hear unexpected noises without panicking. The constant vigilance was fading slowly. Some nights, I still woke up scared, but I could calm myself down instead of staying awake until dawn. A few months later, Amy helped me pack for a weekend trip to a beach 2 hours away. We drove with the windows down and music playing. I kept looking in the rearview mirror just to see my daughter smiling in her car seat. The beach was small and quiet. We spread out our blanket. My daughter immediately grabbed handfuls of sand, laughing as it slipped through her fingers. Amy and I built a sandcastle while my daughter knocked it down over and over, squealing with joy. We walked along the water's edge collecting shells. I realized I wasn't checking my phone every 5 minutes or looking over my shoulder. Nobody knew where we were. Nobody was tracking me. I could just exist in this moment with my daughter and my best friend. The freedom of it made my chest feel light. 2 years later, I walked across the stage in a black cap and gown to accept my associate degree in social work. My daughter sat in the front row wearing a little pink dress, clapping her hands,
calling out for me.
Amy was next to her recording everything with tears running down her face. I shook hands with the college president and held up my diploma. I had a job starting next month at a nonprofit that helped abuse survivors navigate the legal system. My apartment was small, but it was mine. I had friends who showed up when I needed them. A daughter who would grow up watching me build a life on my own terms. The future wasn't perfect. I still had hard days, but it belonged to me.
Stay safe out there. Until next time.